Hello and welcome back to my Empire of Japan Let's Play. Right now we're working on minimizing expenditures. For this we'll probably go with fudge. Nah, we'll go with just the budget so that way we can get more construction speed. Right now let's take a quick look. Construction speed is okay. Consumer goods are kind of hurting us, but today the 15th anniversary of the passing of Emperor Meiji was observed. Major parades in Kyoto, Osaka, and Tokyo were organized. Many schools have prepared special lessons on the life and deeds of the late emperor. Kyoto Imperial University released a 3-volume biography. The first about his life before the Restoration up until the abolishment of the Han system. The second about courtly life and the reforms in the early period. Third on his later life starting the Sino-Japanese War of 1894. The emperor lived through the important renovation of Japanese state and culture. Born in Kyoto the year before, Commodore Perry forced the Blackfoot to open the country, which led to the actions that participated in bringing it down and leading the way towards imperial rule in 1868. Under his wise oversight, Japanese society experienced a breakneck modernization, modern schools, industrial bases, and a modern army was developed. Most importantly, the Meiji Constitution was established under his reign, continued to upheld even to this day, in addition to setting up the initial vestige of Japanese empire in Chosun and Taiwan. While the Japanese people have revered the contributions made by the Meiji, whether his legacy is upheld till this day is up for debate, especially amidst the corruption of bureaucratic staff of the current administration. What do we want to do now? Let's go for it. Gods of the North. All right. Debauchery. After Fujiwara gave a speech over the economic restrictions in place, which I don't think this paused. All right, debauchery. After Fujiwara gave a speech over the economic restrictions in place for the public due to the nationalization level that gripped the attention of the House of Peers, met with immense applause. He took a bow and returned to his seat amongst his allies in the chamber. A chatter flooded the great hall as each of the peers discussed amongst one another while civil servants arranged documents, wrote lists, and passed around files relating to the debatable topics at hand. Dozens of members about their seats, some debating amongst themselves whether the session had just ended, and about their personal lives, following brief moments of snickering. Member Fujiwara was among one of the groups as he swiveled behind and discussed the lavish new cars he had bought with the money shared by party members the night before in an evening entertainment session. Thinking he could not be heard, he continued to smirk with his colleagues over the fun they had and the riches they could now spend. He sniffed after a great laugh and heard the echo of the microphone through the chamber, immediately glancing to center the room to see most of the standing peers gazing at him. Before he glanced in the different directions around the room with an embarrassing flush creeping over his face, swallowed a dry mouthful of air and took a deep breath before disconnecting the microphone under the judging eyes of dozens of political rivals. He went to the newly washed cars and the young women, and the expensive lines burned through his head as he shrunk in his chair from the embarrassment, his suit clinging to him from the sudden coating of sweat that now lathered him. His eyes drifted towards the president of the House of Peers. His eyes were round and hateful, and he exhaled slowly, placing his hand over his chin and remaining silent for the rest of the season. There's no coming back from this. All right, let's go ahead and increase extraction. Let's see. Beautiful, we're starting to build a bunch. Alright. Evidence suggests that the existence of a wider conspiracy does not give a clearance to boldly burst our way through the organs of the state on the pretense of obstruction of justice, said the chief detective, slowly pacing before his men. Authority must take the opposite position in a sense. We must carefully plan our actions before we make them, as well as anticipate and prepare for the results of said actions. He came to a stop and turned to gaze over the uniformed officers assembled in a row of chairs before him. He knew all their faces, the names that went with them in the desk they normally appeared behind. Some of them were veterans of the service, officers and detectives who had given a large portion of their lives to the Tokyo Police Service. Others were newer, recent graduates from police academies, transfers from other departments, military men who wanted a change of pace. Waiting this, the chief resumed. Previously, we have used our obligations to enforce the law like a hammer, smashing aside all obstacles to reveal the information we desire. Here, however, the key is superior to the battering ram. The fierce rivalries between and within the branch of military government have encouraged the growth of culture of underhanded opportunism. It permeates through the office and conference rooms of administration and clouds the judgment of those within. That is the weakness we must exploit. The conditions that motivated the crime will be its perpetrator's undoing. With that, he gathered his papers from the podium in front of him into a pile, straightened it with 2 quick taps against the podium, and walked from his meeting room. As soon as he disappeared from the doorway, his subordinates rose with a chorus of chair legs shaping against the lineum force and set to their tasks. Nobody said it would be easy. All right. Let's go with that to increase our GDP. I don't think we're going to war right now, so we will decrease military spending. All right. The Italian Empire has defeated the Republic of Yugoslavia. Okay. Cheeto and the Partisans defeated. Okay, let's go with opening of the Japan-Korea Tunnel. The long-awaited Japan-Korea Tunnel is finally open today. After over 15 years of construction, the initial Shinkansen project was intended to go into Korea, with plans for extension to Manchuria at a later date, placing some, if not all, shipping between Manchuria and Japan. Built on wide gauges, the tunnel included 3 rail lines, one for freight transport and one for passenger traffic, and one mixed line. Earlier transit between Busan and Fukuoka was done through the ferry, an expensive and long-lasting affair. With its 13 hours duration, the new tunnel cuts this down to a meager 4 hours. Truly a great day for Japan, Korea, and Asia. This is the future. A concrete symbol of East Asian unity. Very cool. Showa no Hi. Rejoice and cheer carried through the streets of the Empire of Japan in the celebration of the majesty in the celebration of the birthday of the Emperor Showa. His Imperial Majesty's new year of life is commemorated by all from Taiwan to Hokkaido, and a festival honoring the age of peace, fraternity, cooperation, independence, Asian brothers now live in. In the reign of the Emperor Showa, the empire had grown in strength and the size of the international superpower status. Now no one dares challenge Japan like they did before the rule of His Imperial Majesty. It was under his rule that the empire had won against imperialism in the Greater East Asian War, and under his rule that the mighty co-prosperity was founded to preserve the sacred peace. Millions gathered to observe the holiday in public or at home to wish good health upon the emperor, so that his prosperity and just rule may continue long into the future. Friends of friends in the right places. Smoke from the chief detective's cigarette wafted towards the ceiling. As he leaned back to his office chair, it rippled past the frosted glass windows that separated his office from the common area that housed the desk of the department's officers and detective. 2 of such detectives sat in front of him now, each in an uncomfortable metal chair half a meter away from this hulking mass of polished wood that served as the chief's desk. One was a senior detective, Kore, a long-standing veteran of the Tokyo police. His age began to show in the wrinkles around his eyes and the dusting of gray hairs on his head. The other was a younger man transferred from the department in Osaka named Tachi. He had served as an officer for a number of years, followed by a handful more as a detective. While senior remained somewhat relaxed in his chair, the young detective leaned forward to speak. What I'm trying to say, sir, he began, is given the circumstances, it would make sense to establish an informal network inside key offices beforehand, then trying to build a network of contacts as we go along. Chief tapped a cigarette on the rim of glass ashtray, one of the few things that he saw set on his otherwise barren desk. What do you mean by informal? I said. Unofficial connections, mostly, Cutter interjected. Former contacts for old cases, friends of friends, old army buddies, whatever. People who we could ask to take care of pen and paper tasks that bureaucrats are usually not motivated to do. All with the understanding that efforts deeply appreciated by the Tokyo Police Service, who happily remember or forget their contributions depending on which they prefer. And because of the rather sensitive nature of the operation, Tachi thinks we think it would be best to limit our network to one major government working group. Otherwise, we risk alerting conspirators if they find out half of their officers go down for coffee at the station once a week. For our purpose, we make them in either Army, Navy, or the Diet Administration, sir. The Army. Very cool. Right now our production's okay. Let's make sure our construction is going well. I want to keep building some civilian factories, so oops. There we go. Alright, the chief detective sat behind his desk, carefully flicking through his roll of contact cards. Each card was given at least a moment's worth of attention, enough to read the name stamped on it, and now blocking. Most then were immediately flicked past and forgotten. But a few were worthy of another moment of consideration. A few were still made the detective pause altogether. Just for the names of people in the same way one would search for the names of the street, unconcerned with the memories, thoughts, and feelings related to the names, only their usefulness as a path from one place to another. But the roads he sought led to the heart of the Imperial monolith, and they were neither easily found nor traversed. Doubly so in the case of the Tax Bureau and the Board of Audit. The Tax Bureau was the attack dog of the Ministry of Finance. Inspiring gang leaders or company vendors had their dreams dashed by discerning gaze, careful calculations of the agents. The Bureau demanded the information in torrents of paperwork for accuracy, consistency, and redundancy, and had amassed a hoard of data in an impossibly intricate filing system. It neared an intelligence agency in its own right, devoted to a single person following and securing the revenue of empire. By contrast, the board audit was a reclusive agency shunned by the ministries of the cabinet. This made little difference. Most officials, in some senses, prefer like this to examine the finance and records of various public institutions that spread in the empire. But the board's position in the hierarchy was artificial, since they reported to diet but were subordinate only to the emperor. They acted with the divine purpose of exposing the subversives who exploit the empire for personal gain, and had done so in the past from time to time. In recent years, the office had fallen silent. The chief leaned back in his chair, juggling a lit cigarette between his fingers. Two names now set before him, one to each office. He considered for a moment, then reached to pick up on the phone. Talk to the taxman, ask an auditor. Huh. Let's ask an auditor. Kind of arbitrary why I picked that one, but I feel like the auditor would know more, maybe. The parallel approach. Detective Tachi and Kodari stood under the canopy that covered the entrance to the Tokyo Central Police Station. They stood side by side, not quite facing each other, but not quite facing away. Backs to the door. Each held a cigarette, Tachi in his left hand, Kodari in his right, which they would raise their lips every now and again. Between them, 4 cigarette butts sat crushed on the floor. How it seems to me, said Kodara, pausing to pull on a cigarette, is that we have two angles to approach this case at. One is through the killer himself, who he was, where he came from, how he ended up here, tragic backstory, all that nonsense. The other is to go through the circumstances of the killing, why it happened, where it did, when it did, and the way that it did. You think it's just a matter of picking the right one? Tachi asked. That's just it, replied Kodara, eagerly inhaling another puff. If there really is a conspiracy, or at least one going further than we found already, none of those details would have been left to chance. What I mean is, it's not just about whether those angles lead, it's about where they overlap. He's trying to look at him. So what do you suggest? He asked. 2 teams, each of us leading one focused on the criminal, the other on the crime. We keep the specific local to our team, but you and I meet private to discuss, compare, and coordinate. Maximum coverage, minimum risk. You know how much I enjoy rooting through the personal effects of deranged and disturbed, Kodara said with a smirk, but I think I'll have to let you take the lead in that respect, seeing that you've yet to have the chance since you got here. Considering this an impromptu field lecture on Tokyo criminal psychology, he said, bringing the remains of a cigarette back to his lip. Tachi flashed a quick smile then in reply before he dropped the smoldering ends of his cigarette on the ground and crushed it beneath the sole of his scuffed leather shoe. Let's see, maximizing growth. Yeah, that's not super great, but it's fine. Knowing what we don't know. 5 men crowded around the worn table in the meeting room of the ward police station. 3 were officers, each clad in a dark blue uniform and carrying a shining badge of office and a clip at their waist. 2 were Detective Tachi and another recent transfer to the team. All of them leaned over the collage of files, documents, and pictures, really carefully arranged in a half circle around a picture of Royal Takahara. So in total, said Tachi, the other 4 men turning to face him as he spoke, we know 3 essential things about Takahara here. First, that he killed Shinji Yoshikawa in a very specific manner despite no apparent relation between them. Second, he is a member of the armed forces, very likely the army. And third, he is a half-brother in the Tokyo police station willing to assist him. The rest of the group nodded in reply. So that gives us with 2 major avenues of investigation, he continued. Military angle, finding out what military knew about him, what he did for them, or we can cover the basics as we would in a normal case, establish a broader background, get a more general sense of who he was as a person, why social groups were, his habits, and so on. Regardless, our goal is to construct a motivation for his prior actions. From there, try to form a reasonable connection to further parties. 3 of the other men nodded again, but the 4th, a bright-eyed young officer in the south, was, Sir, given the circumstances of the case, that is, the fact that the subject had a brother in the police force, should we consider that an angle of investigation too? Tachi hesitated a moment for playing. At this stage, we are missing so much on the basic facts of the case that I don't know we can make a real headway in a related investigation at that moment. If there is more to be found inside the forest, going in blind would make things more difficult. So that being said, I propose let's take the military route. The infantryman's caretaker, unexpected securing Tokyo's military affairs was no simple matter. The Imperial General Headquarters Administrative Office that startled the chasm between the Army administrators was initially willing to cooperate with the administrators without much bother. In reality, they can merely point the investigators towards the relevant branch, in this case the Army, maintains sole administrative responsibility over Takai's files. From then on, the effort of the team were completely subject to the whims of the IGA personnel bureau. For days on end, the desk workers of the investigative team filled out forms, made phone calls, issued requests, resubmitted forms, all while making sure to file everything in triplicate. No amount of pressure or intimidation seemed to have any effect on the staff either. Such efforts were met with monotone voices over phone calls and glazed eyes in person. Finally, after what he felt like an eternity, Corey arrived early one morning clutching a package sealed in a black plastic cover. After he checked and rechecked Detective Tachi's ID, recently handed him the package before retreating back to the Tokyo streets. The package contained Takai's basic military files, including those regarding his recruitment evaluation, training, and performance records. Files confirmed much of what they were already suspected. Takai had joined almost immediately after finishing school and was quickly sent to the basic training. There he passed his training regime without issue and was cleared for active service. Psychology and performance reports revealed more noteworthy information. However, his superiors regarded him as jumpy and even times overly eager, but he was also praised for his quick adherence to orders and lack of hesitation in simulated combat. The last of his files stated that he had been stationed in northern Indonesia a few years ago as part of the Imperial Security Battalion deployed to the region, but they offered no further insight into his role or his more recent actions. Interesting. While securing the first set of files from the from guests of the Army had been difficult, it palled in comparison to the more recent files. Every day, some new issues raised that grounded the investigation process to a halt. Every single day, some new form needed to be filled out. An official needed to be corresponded with. The detective would submit a request form one day, only for it to return a few days later with a note stating list of departments the form needed to be sent to simultaneously in order for it to be considered. All along the way, representatives from the Army scrutinized the investigation and their motives. They had potential issues with security and demanded their relevance and justification for achieving the files. Finally, with endless trading of paperwork reaching a stalemate, an agreement was reached. Tachi and his fellow detective would be granted access to files in a secure room at the IGA regional staff headquarters in central Tokyo, but they would not be permitted to remove the files, but they had to be allowed to record any information they seemed relevant, while under supervision, of course. Earlier the next morning, Tachi and his partner started through the doors of the HQ, each with a small stack of notebooks under their arms. 6 hours later, they re-emerged. 6 months ago, Royal Takahara enrolled in an explosive certification training course. Primary purpose, of course, was the groom soldier station throughout the cost for anti-insurgent units, studying ID identification and defusal. Takai never expressed interest in joining such a unit, both before and after he undertook training. Really, the team concluded the only motion he had to take this course was a preparation for planting a corpse bomb discovered during the initial investigation. It was clear that Yami had played some role in this case. Provided the necessary skills, intentionally or otherwise, and it is now time to see if they'd provided the equipment. Anyone missing a grenade? What is this? Pacific Land. Interesting. Okay. Midori scanned the letter Tachi had given him. It was printed on the same stiff and sturdy paper that all high-ranking offices of the Empire used. It sealed the Imperial Japanese Army was stamped in shimmering gold at the top. It did, however, lack any precision folds that were often across the letters, suggesting it had been sent in a large envelope, likely with other files. Tachi, however, had only felt the need to bring this one. He sat next close to his desk, carefully studying each word, while Tachi stood silently in front of him. Finally, he lowered the paper to his desk and looked up. "Oh, convenient, don't you think?" Kodaya said. "To say the least. I mean, here we have a suspect in confirmed murder, mind you. He was actively deployed to the IJA, and under their supervision, he was given a crash course in explosives, and then used his newfound skills in an attempt to cover his crime. The attempt specifically involved the use of multi-issue grenade. But despite all that, Army can't seem to find anything to suggest their inventories are inaccurate, or tampered with, and even the slightest way, and they have no interest in entertaining the possibility that Takari gained this restricted material in any other way. It means that either the quality of Army records have dropped substantially since I last checked, or someone is afraid of self-reflection." Tachi nodded grimly in reply. Wilfred Kodara looked back at his letter, and my experience, letters like these are paper equivalent of a door being slammed in your face. Which is why Tachi said, swiping the letter from the senior detective's desk, we're going to have to move fast if we want to get our foot in. Let's see, free dockyards. A bunch of cruisers. Probably good for now. It's just a budget. The issue is a budget, which is in need of updating. The needs of our brave armies and courageous navies are constantly shifting, and so the needs of our helpless people on the sphere who need our benevolence. We shall continue to adjust the budget accordingly. Like any moment now an event's going to pop up for the cutting expenditures. An army with a secret. Detective Kadari and Detective Tachi stood just beyond the edge of the chief detective's desk. On the other side of the polished plateau, the chief sat preying at the report Kadari had handed him shortly after they walked into the room. His wire-framed glasses set low on his nose as he carefully examined the work of his subordinates line by line. The office was still, the silence only interrupted by the occasional rustling of papers as the chief turned the page. Finally, the chief detective brought his gaze from the papers on his desk and up to meet the eyes of the two men before him. "You're certain?" he asked. Tachi opened his mouth to reply, but Kadari beat him to it. "Absolutely, sir," he said firmly. "The evidence we have compiled based on the profile of Tiger simply cannot be dismissed as circumstantial. Every indication to this Kadari's motivations were either facilitated by some personnel from the army or made feasible by some failure within its system. Regardless, the generally poor cooperation shown between the IRA, GS, combined with the almost pathological insufficient maintenance of records, should provide more than enough grounds to justify a reorientation of the investigation towards the military administration." As he finished, the chief flicked his hard gaze towards Tachi. "And you," the chief said. "Couldn't have said it better myself, sir," Tachi replied quickly. "Well then," said the chief, sliding the report back to his folder. "Get to it then." Hospital call. Tachi leaned his bike towards his home, a hut made out of wood close to the sea, letting the wall support it from falling. He took his glasses from his shirt pocket and looked to see where the sun was halfway across the electric light, strung like a pearl necklace, began turning on, faint but resistant against the incandescence. Waves lapped the gray sand of the coast, patches of wet flotsam strung across its surface. When his eyes passed through the lens, he saw the world, the blobs and blotches of the sharp, defined miracles of modern science. He thought there was nothing wrong with his eyes, up until his little agreement of an Uchtrin, wearing his first pair of spectacles was an experience of discovery. He'd never seen the world as clear as he did under the eaves of two concave lenses. "Father," a voice said from inside, "are you there?" The doorknob turned, and Takashi stepped out, the last shreds of sunlight dying on the slope of his chin. Plain-faced young man whose work in the dirty marketplace is considered brilliantly mine. Scholarship in Tokyo. She's about this kid would go far. "There you are," Taki said, smiling, trying to hide the worst gloom in his eyes. "How was the catch?" "Rough," I said, downcast. "We'll have enough, however. The situation has become awkward." Walter said, "Akin is in a hospital." His eyes widened. 17-year-old Akin was in the cups of her youth and had to lie in a hospital bed, afflicted with illness, straightened his bike. "So, son, I won't be home for dinner tonight." "What illness?" "Ooh, okay. Start making those. Alright, a diagnosis. Hushes on the doctor's head, his eyes clad in a clinical concern as spick and span as his lab coat. "Please follow me to my room. We need to discuss specifics of Kanchan's situation." Hayashi was familiar with such demeanor. The medic in his own platoon often carried the same wary and stoic expression. Really had to convey bad news trailing behind the doctor. Hayashi glanced at the past window. The high school at that block should view to the sea. The chemical factory, one of his proudest centers of employment, loomed. Its waste pipes directed coastward. Entering the doctor's room, he sat down across another. Doctor sat behind his desk, pulling a file from his drawer. Monochrome's photographs seemed to spill out from the manila-colored cover. "I am sure," Doctor said. "You've seen a common change symptoms last week," stammered words, uneven gulp, and convulsions, fingers that curl into claws. "I have." As a father, Hashi could only give answers that might help speed his daughter's recovery. Lieutenant let him go to work. "Did you know the cause?" After a brief pause, the Argentine see these photographs here, fingers, weakness, twisted limbs. "I know you're not one to be peeved at this sort of thing," Hashi nodded. The doctor was right. All the victims have the same kind of diet, fish or shellfish. "Don't take my word for it," he stroked his chin. "But I think the factory there might be suspect. Heavy metal poisoning. Kim is one of the larger cases, but it better be if she doesn't eat fish from the London area. Are you sure it's a fault of the factory?" 70 to 80%, yeah. Hashi immediately knew what to do. A father's love lies above heaven and earth. Swearing up. The investigation as a whole had grown thoroughly tired of their mostly one-sided conversations with the army. The process of contacting the correct offices, requesting the correct forms, getting a reply had more in common with pulling teeth and pulling records. But given most of the divisions were trained in desk work and not dentistry, their collective patience from the process evaporated quickly. As a result, the two detectives, Kadir and Tachi, conspired with the chief to come up with a strategy to break the bureaucratic gridlock. Tachi proposed a direct route. He maintained the army could not waver or slink away from such serious their feelings if they were brought out in light, explaining the situation to the higher echelons of the army command would force a response of necessity. Would tolerate such conduct even less than investigation could. And they needed to demand, Tachi said, was accountability. Korea, on the other hand, pushed for indirect roundabout approach. He argued that they would never get what they needed from the army by operating under the impression they were on even ground, because they clearly were not. Instead, they should go to around the army and send the correct agency organization towards the existing evidence of an arrangement, and the secrets would come spilling out of their own accord. As carefully made their case, Chief layered over two positions carefully before holding the bait with his decision. I think the army is like who did it, and they're not just going to admit it, so we'll go behind their backs. I think that's the best case scenario. The Gatekeeper. Haji, today would be another day of work. As a soldier turned fisherman, he did not have much time for holidays or vacation. Takeshi and Akane depended on him. At the very least, he would see them complete educations to his children as to his state, duty to everything, in the bright glare of his morning sunlight, near the factory's opening hours, as winds were blowing out of the sea. He and his local veterans stood by his gate, preventing anyone from leaving and entering. When the police came to dissuade them, they brandished their rifles and machetes, running no less dual nor deadly by the years spent in unuse. The police threatened to evict them forcibly from the premise. They fired a few warning shots. Finally, as a last resort, police sent a friend of Hachi's, a local bar owner, to meet with him. In essence, he looked ridiculous, the skin and complexion of a man unused to exertions happening under sunlight, much less in the early morning. Hachi saw newborn and said, "You gone mad? Have you cracked? If you stand down now, they'll let you go. You're a veteran," Hachi said, "and they respect that." But enough said, "Apparently, me and the boys were having one condition, a meeting with any official. Scratch that. Official. I need someone who can do something regarding this." Points to the chin, the fact is, "One, sorry, that's all. I'll stand down once I know who I am talking to." By midday, the news had spread to the country. In the evening, they had reached the ears of Prime Minister Ino. A new scandal? Bored to death, Koderia's strategy required a good deal of planning and careful consideration before it could be set in motion. The goal was to locate and coordinate with an organization that was legally and functionally separate from the army bureaucracy, but still carried enough authority to force it into compliance. This proved to be difficult due to strength of the army's representative. The imperial government, their political presence was commanded by the army ministry, to represent them on the imperial cabinet. Their operations and conduct were governed by the IGA General Staff Office. There was only one office, according to Kodir, that could possibly face the challenge and have even a minuscule success: the Imperial Board of Audit. The board existed in a strange space between Japanese administration, seemingly independent of both national diet and various ministries of state. The imperial auditors were directly subordinate to the emperor himself. On paper, this portrayed the board as a being above all in a certain sense, a manifestation of the divine will of the emperor, endowed with the responsibility to control the loyalty of the office of the empire. In practice, however, the empire had little interest in managing the glorified accountants. The board had fallen under the de facto collective authority of the cabinet. This had left the board in a sorry state, potentially ignored or forgotten, save for the occasional politicized busy work. Investigation plea for assistance was received as a welcome change of pace. Indeed, even though they were only provided only the basis of details of why help was needed, the objective was the board's residents were eager to carry out the original charge, doubly so when they leaned to objective scrutiny were within the cabinet itself. All for the good of the empire, of course. A quandary. Okay. Every day, Tekka drove Prime Minister Ino to his office in the National Diet. On their way there, they passed crowds of people going to work on foot, ready to earn their living. The wooden innards of Tokyo appeared there, here and there, while they mostly saw the only stony modern facades of the finance and commercial office complexes. In Osama, Takeda said to Ino, "Have you decided what to do with Takeda's voice died off, trying to translate the full name? Benchino Monta, veteran, he's everyone in the news nowadays. Seemed like trouble." The Prime Minister reclined in the seat on the back of the car, deep in thought. It slipped my mind earlier. Thank you for reminding me. After a moment, in several avenues, Kid spoke, I saw my father as a veteran, fought in China and everything. If we knew that some bigwig corporation had put chemicals in my water, he would have been enraged the same way this Michonne person. Takeda adjusted the rearview mirror as they stopped for the traffic light. "I sympathize, is all. And you're usually this talkative. Do you mind what the man did righteous?" "No," Kid said, stammering. "I just found it understandable coming from a veteran's family." Lower voice, he continued. "When I was little, my father would usually wake up screaming. Now he just sits under the eaves, his eyes blank. He felt as if his country had left him behind. When he addressed the diet building, anyone on the car and addressed his chauffeur, the veteran might have a point. I appreciate your advice." You might have a point. I feel like that's what he would have done in that situation. That's not like, I know like I'm going with like, oh, we do everything to make Japan as strong as possible, but I feel like in this specific scenario, that's what he would have done. So I'm going to go with here. PMM Poison. Unfortunately, everyone was excited to see the Board of Audit's functional role restored. In order to avoid alerting any potential conspirators or implicated in the investigation, the board had resolved to act alone publicly, while coordinating and corresponding privately with the investigation. Even though their position within the imperial hierarchy was a point of unrecognized contention, pretending that the role was fundamentally proactive, they did not intend to simply wait around until whispers of corruption reached the ears of the emperor himself. They claimed, whether at any time an issue or inconsistency within the government was brought before them, they were bound by duty and honor to see it resolved. However, the various members and ministries that comprised the cabinet were unmoved by the board's lofty claims. It was the cabinet's view that while the board was independent of every individual ministry, they were not independent of all the ministries taken together. They allowed for unprompted audits with undisclosed motives and orders. They risked allowing the poison of factionalism back into the imperial government. How could the cabinet be sure the audit was not intended to meet some opportunistic political goal? One of the ministries of the cabinet said some form of argument, save for the army ministry, who essentially screamed that they found their files particular were in question. Seeing this, the joint board investigation team took stock and tried to formulate a new approach. They found that there were two possible directions. Either they could try to avoid the cabinet entirely by reaching to the highest possible levels of Japanese administration, or they could approach the division that represented the police and turmoil of the imperial politics, Bureau of Public Order, over their heads or bring in the bureau. Seeing as the team took stock and tried to form a new, it could avoid the cabinet entirely. You know what? The cabinet's fighting us, so we'll go over their heads. And unfortunately, with that, our time has run out for this episode. Please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.